The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Wren Calloway would later say was the cruelest part. Tuesdays were supposed to be nothing days, laundry days, days when nothing changed. But the envelope sitting on the kitchen table of her aunt's house in Broken Bow, Nebraska, had the return address of a law firm out of Cheyenne, Wyoming, and Wren's hands were already shaking before she broke the seal. Her mother had left her something. Not money, a ranch. 43 acres outside a town called Harlow Flats, a working cattle operation called the Drum Creek Spread, and a name attached to it she didn't recognize, Theodore Voss, listed as co-owner, listed as the man who had managed the property for the last 11 years while Wren's mother, Cecile, was too sick and then too gone to manage it herself. Wren had never heard of Theodore Voss. Her mother had never mentioned a ranch. She had never mentioned Harlow Flats, Wyoming, and she had certainly never mentioned that she owned half of 43 acres and had quietly arranged, in the final amendment to her will, that the other half pass to the daughter she left behind. Wren Calloway was 26 years old, worked part-time at a grain supply office, and had $82 in her checking account. She read the letter 3 times. Then she called the law firm, asked the most important question she could think of, and got an answer that made her sit down on her aunt's kitchen floor. The ranch was profitable, had been for years. She was in Harlow Flats by Friday. The drive west from Broken Bow was the kind of drive that convinces a person the world is mostly sky. Wren crossed into Wyoming with the windows down, and the radio losing signal every 30 miles, the land flattening out until the mountains caught it at the edges and pulled it vertical. She had packed everything she owned into 2 duffel bags and a cardboard box. It didn't feel like starting over. It felt like arriving somewhere she hadn't been invited. Harlow Flats was small enough that the gas station attendant which property she meant before she finished describing it. Drum Creek, the man said, nodding. That's Voss land. Well, partly. He gave her a careful look. You the daughter? I am, she said. He handed back her change without another word. The road to the property was unpaved for the last 2 miles, and by the time Wren pulled through the gate and up the gravel drive, the sun was sitting low and the whole place was the color of hammered copper. The house was modest, 2 stories, white paint going gray, a covered porch with 1 broken board she could see from 30 feet away. The barn was newer than the house and better maintained. 3 horses stood in the near pasture watching her car like they were expecting someone else. Theodore Voss was standing on the porch when she got out. He was not what she had pictured. She had pictured someone like the law firm, precise, formal, holding a clipboard. Theodore Voss was somewhere north of 40, lean in the way of men who work rather than exercise, with a jaw that looked like it had been set with a level and eyes that were doing a careful inventory of her before she'd taken 3 steps. He didn't come down the porch stairs to greet her. Miss Calloway, he said. Not a question. Wren, she said. You can call me Wren. He didn't offer that she could call him anything. He showed her the house, walked through each room with the efficiency of a man presenting acreage, not a home. The bedroom that had been Cecile's was at the end of the upstairs hall, door closed, and Theodore did not open it. He showed her the kitchen, the back door, the water pressure issue with the second bathroom. He told her where the circuit breaker was. He said the ranch hands, 2 of them, started at 5:30, and she was welcome to speak with them directly. I'll need to go over the books with you, Wren said when they were back in the kitchen. The financial records. Everything. Something moved through his expression that wasn't quite surprise. All right, he said, and I'll need to understand how decisions get made. Co-ownership means I have a say. You have half a say, he said. Flat, not unkind. Same as me. She held his gaze. Then we'd better learn to agree. He poured 2 cups of coffee without asking if she wanted one, set hers on the counter, and left the room. The books were in order. That was the first thing Wren learned, and it mattered, because she had arrived with quiet suspicions she hadn't said out loud, that Theodore Voss had been managing Drum Creek for 11 years with no oversight and might have made himself comfortable in ways the ledgers would reveal. But the ledgers were clean. 3 sets, organized by year, expenses against revenue, every invoice clipped and dated. She spent 2 evenings at the kitchen table going through them while Theodore worked outside, and when she looked up after midnight on the second night, she found a plate of reheated stew left on the counter for her. She didn't mention it. He didn't mention it. The days had a shape she hadn't expected. She was up before 5 without trying. The house itself seemed to wake early, the horses moving in the dark, the creak of the barn door when Theodore and the hands started morning feeding. She began going out before breakfast. Not to help, at first, just to watch. She didn't know cattle. She didn't know horses. Not really. Not the way these men did. She had grown up in town with a mother who never talked about where she came from, and now she was standing in Wyoming in borrowed boots, trying to understand why her mother had kept all of this a secret. Theodore noticed her watching. He didn't comment on it. But on the fourth morning, without preamble, he handed her a spare pair of work gloves and tilted his head toward the far pasture. She followed. He didn't explain much. He pointed, demonstrated, expected her to keep up. But he was patient in a way she hadn't anticipated from a man who seemed to conduct most of his communication with a minimum of words. When she made a mistake, and she made several, he corrected her once and moved on. He didn't circle back to it. He didn't keep score. She learned, faster than she expected, because the land had a logic to it that she found herself trusting. What she did not learn, not quickly, was Theodore Voss himself. He was polite. He was capable. She came to suspect after the first 2 weeks, deeply private, in a way that had nothing to do with her specifically and everything to do with whatever he had built inside himself over years of working alone. The hands, a man called Featherstone and a younger one called Ruiz, seemed to respect him in a way that wasn't quite warm but wasn't distant either. They spoke about him the way men speak about weather, as a fact of the landscape, reliable, occasionally severe, always worth paying attention to. One evening, Wren found a photograph tucked inside one of the financial binders. A younger Theodore, unmistakably, standing beside a woman with dark hair and her arm through his. She set it aside without looking at it too long. It wasn't her business, but she thought about it for 3 days afterward. The trouble came in the form of a man named Aldous Brent, and it came on a Monday, which proved that Tuesdays did not have a monopoly on disruption. Aldous Brent arrived in a car that was too clean for the road and a suit that was too deliberate for Harlow Flats. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, silver-haired, with a manner that suggested he had spent his career being right in rooms where being right mattered. He introduced himself as the representative of Garrett Brent, no relation declared, though the name was the same, a land developer out of Casper, who had, in the last 18 months, purchased 4 of the 6 ranches adjacent to or near the Drum Creek property. He sat down at the kitchen table without being invited and laid out a purchase offer with the confidence of a man who expected it to be accepted. The number was significant. Theodore read it once, set it face down on the table. Not interested, he said. Aldous Brent's gaze shifted to Wren. Mrs. Calloway, you've recently inherited your share of this property. I imagine you have a clearer sense than your partner of what a sum like this could mean for a young woman starting out. The way he said your partner managed to imply several things at once, none of them accurate. Wren picked up the offer. Read it herself. Set it back down. Mr. Brent, she said, who owns the parcels to the north and northeast of this property? A pause. Garrett Brent Holdings. And the water rights attached to those parcels, have they been consolidated? Another pause. Shorter. I'm not certain that's relevant to. Drum Creek runs through the northern pasture, Wren said. If the water rights to the land surrounding the creek's source have been purchased by a single entity, and that entity then acquires this property as well, they'd control the water access for most of the remaining small operations in this valley. She folded her hands on the table. That's relevant. Aldous Brent recalibrated. She could see it happening. The offer stands for 30 days, he said, standing. I hope you'll both consider it carefully. After he left, the kitchen was quiet for a moment. Theodore was looking at her. I went through the land survey records yesterday, she said. The ones from 2019. Your filing cabinet, second drawer. I know where they are, he said. Did you know about the water issue? Suspected. You didn't say. You hadn't asked. It was the most frustrating answer she'd ever received, and she stood up and started on the dinner dishes to give her hand something to do. Theodore, she said to the window above the sink. If we sell, what happens to Featherstone and Ruiz? The pause behind her lasted long enough that she turned around. They lose their jobs, he said. This is the only operation in the valley still running at this scale. There's nothing nearby for them to go to. She nodded, turned back to the dishes. Then we're not selling, she said. What came next was not simple. Garrett Brent Holdings filed a water rights claim against Drum Creek's northern pasture access within 3 weeks of Aldous Brent's visit. Theodore's attorney, a careful, humorless woman named Deborah Keene, who drove up from Rawlins, said the claim had technical merit in the filing but procedural problems in its history. It would need to go to a hearing. It would take months. In the meantime, they could not modify, reroute, or make capital improvements to anything connected to the northern pasture water system. Theodore took the news in the way he took most things. Quietly, with a jaw that set slightly harder. Wren took it differently. She started making calls, not to attorneys at first, to county records, to neighboring ranchers, the few left, to a woman at the Wyoming Water Development Commission who had an encyclopedic memory for historical easements and was pleased, it turned out, that someone young was asking about them. Wren sat at the kitchen table every evening after the ranch work was done with a legal pad covered in notes, and she did not tell Theodore what she was building toward, because she wasn't certain yet that it would hold. On the 22nd day after the claim was filed, she found what she needed. a recorded easement from 1931. Drum Creek's water access across the northern boundary had been formally established as a right of use, not a license, by a county agreement that predated the current parcel map by 40 years. The water rights claim that Garrett Brent Holdings had filed was built on a legal architecture that didn't account for the easement, because the easement was in a county records archive that had been digitized only partially, and the relevant page had never made it online. Wren had found it on a Thursday afternoon in the basement of the Harlow Flats County Clerk's office, in a binder that smelled like a different century. She drove back to the ranch with the photocopied document on the passenger seat. Theodore was in the barn when she got back. She stood at the barn door and waited until he looked up.
"I found it," she said. He set down what he was holding, walked toward her. "Read the document," she held out. "Read it a second time. Where was it?" "County Clerk. Physical Archive."
She paused. No one from Brent's team asked for physical records.
They assumed the digitized database was complete.
Theodore was quiet for a moment. Outside, one of the horses stamped in the near pasture.
"Deborah needs this today," he said.
"I know. I already called her." He looked at her, not the careful inventorying look from the first day. Something different, something that took longer than a glance.
"You've been working on this for 3 weeks," he said.
"Yes, without saying anything. I didn't want to get your hopes up if I couldn't find it."
He handed the document back. His fingers nearly grazed hers and didn't. "Thank you, Wren," he said. It was the first time he had used her name. The hearing was scheduled for late September.
In the weeks before it, the ranch ran as it always had. Early mornings, hard work, the land doing what land does regardless of who is arguing over it in a Rollins hearing room. But something had shifted inside the house. Not dramatically. Walls didn't come down. Theodore Voss was not, by nature, a man given to dramatic gestures. But the silence between them changed its quality. It became comfortable rather than watchful. He started explaining things without being asked. She started asking without feeling like she was trespassing. One evening he told her about the woman in the photograph. Her name had been Suzanne. She had died 4 years ago, a brief illness that became a long one. She had loved this place, he said, had been the one who first talked about what the land could become with the right management.
He said it to the far pasture, not to Wren,
looking through the kitchen window while she cleared the table. She didn't say she was sorry. It seemed insufficient, she said. She was right about the land, and he turned from the window and nodded once, as though that was exactly the thing to say. There was one night, mid-September, when the temperature dropped suddenly and the whole world smelled like coming cold, when they sat on the porch longer than usual, neither of them in a hurry to go in. The stars over Harlow Flats were unreasonable, more than any city let you see, and Wren sat with her coffee and thought about her mother keeping this secret for 26 years. The ranch, the sky, the man on the other end of the porch who had managed it all in her absence.
"Did you know she had a daughter?"
Wren asked.
"Cecil, did she ever tell you about me?"
Theodore was quiet for a moment. She said she had a girl, he said. Said she made mistakes she couldn't undo and the girl had paid for them. He glanced at her. "She didn't say your name."
Wren held her coffee with both hands.
"She made it sound like my fault," she said.
"Not quite bitterly, just precisely." "No," Theodore said. "She made it sound like her own." Wren nodded, looked up at the sky. "Why did she leave this to me?" she said. "She never told me it existed. She could have sold her half, left the money instead." Theodore considered this like he considered most things, slowly, without rushing toward an answer just to fill the space. "I think," he said.
"She wanted you to have something she couldn't give you herself."
He paused. "Something that would still be here." The wind moved through the pasture grass. One of the horses shifted in the dark. Wren didn't say anything, but she didn't go inside either. The hearing went 4 hours.
Deborah Keene presented the 1931 easement with the methodical calm of a woman who had been waiting for the other side to make exactly this mistake. The Brent Holdings attorneys asked for a recess twice. When the hearing officer issued his preliminary finding, it was in Drum Creek's favor on every substantive point. Aldous Brent's car did not return to the ranch. On the afternoon the decision was confirmed in writing. Wren was in the north pasture checking the fence line when Theodore found her. He came across the field on horseback, which was unusual for him. He tended to walk. He dismounted near her and stood with his horse's reins loose in his hand in the afternoon light, doing something complicated to the whole situation.
"It's done," he said. "I know. Deborah called me."
He nodded. A silence.
"Featherstone wants to celebrate," he said. "His word. There may be a circumstance involving his wife's pie." Wren laughed, which surprised them both a little.
She had laughed before at the ranch, more than she expected to, honestly, but this one came up from somewhere lower.
"All right," she said.
He turned back toward his horse, then stopped. Turned again.
"Wren," she waited. "This is yours," he said. He was looking at the land, not at her. At the fence line and the creek and the hills going gold in the September light. You found what no one else bothered to look for, and you didn't make noise about it. You just found it. He paused. Cecily was right to leave it to you. She looked at the land with him. It took both of us, she said. Yes, he said, it did. He rode back toward the barn.
She stood a moment longer in the north pasture, in the light that was going amber, in the place her mother had left her without explanation, in the middle of the only thing she hadn't known she needed. Then she followed.